end up in an intensive care unit. Now for more, let's bring in Professor Klaus Rabe. He's a pulmonary doctor and former president of the German Respiratory Society. It's good to have you on the program. How does COVID-19 differ from other respiratory diseases, and what does it mean to the people treating patients?
First of all, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. This is a relevant question that's been asked to doctors like me all the time. Listen, there are commonalities and there are differences. Commonalities are this is a virus infection. And it means that you get symptoms such as cough, such as dyspnea in some patients, some mild symptoms, as you described in the program. There are some differences, however, and that is what we've learned. We've learned that people may have symptoms for a few days, and at day 6, 7, 8, they become severe. They develop dyspnea. They develop sort of a fatigue syndrome. They develop aches. And that makes sometimes the oxygen fall. It makes these people to present with more severe diseases, and this is when they need intensive care treatment.
What is the biggest problem with people that need this intensive care treatment?
Well, there are two things, obviously. You need the capacity to host them, to treat them in hospitals, and we've seen the reports from around the world. Shortages of intensive care beds has been a major shortfall in this discussion. In systems like ours in Germany at present, where we have enough capacity that seems manageable, although it takes a lot of toll from the nurses and the doctors and the intensive care units. But immediate care in intensive care with oxygen supply, with the delivery of proper care, including ventilation, is something which is needed then, especially since we know we have no real treatment available other than symptomatic treatment in the acutely severe individual.
Right. And patients that end up in intensive care usually need to be ventilated. At which point do you decide to do that?
Well, there are rules that are not COVID-specific, if you want. If someone develops this form of pneumonia, which starts with an interstitial pneumonia, as we say it, in the CT scan, it's detectable. These people drop with the oxygen tension. These people get severely dyspnoic. And when we measure an oxygen tension below a certain level, that's the time when we realize that there's a fatigue of respiration, that people need that sort of support. These people are then put on a ventilator in intensive care. Some people will be bridged maybe with non-invasive ventilation to avoid mechanical ventilation, but a lot of people end then in mechanical ventilation, and this is when they end up in ICU. This is another point that is making it different. We learned with time that the duration of ventilation in these individuals is longer than we anticipated, and it takes quite a few days until it's decided which turn they take.
Okay, and what does it mean being ventilated for the patients themselves?
It means that you're not conscious. It means that you are deeply sedated in an awake coma. That's what it's sometimes reported as. You will be intubated with a tube, and the airway system will be cannulated, and you will be ventilated by a machine with a certain oxygen delivery and a certain pressure to take over the mechanical need of breathing at the time when you're not capable of saturating your body with oxygen. It's an extreme situation. It takes a lot of toll, and it is a severe state. And you will know from the figures that a lot of people, unfortunately, die under these conditions.
Can you tell us anything about the possible long-term impacts? Do patients' lungs fully recover once the infection is over?
Well, I think that's a very relevant question, and we've been asked this by many people, obviously. The syndrome or the symptoms or the disease is called ARDS, and people probably have seen this and heard this, acute respiratory distress syndrome. It means that there is chaos, if you want, in the lung. There's leakiness of the vessels and or the membranes in the lung. There's a lot of inflammation going on. We know from the literature from ARDS that a lot of people will have follow-up problems with their lungs. They scar. They will develop some sort of what we call fibrosis. These things may last for quite a long time once you survive them. So the research is now addressing this already, the long-term consequences of the lung disease, but also other diseases the heart is one of the organ systems that will also be affected. So we would expect that once people survive intensive care and ventilation, there's a high chance for long-term follow-up sequelae and long-term follow-up complications, unfortunately.
Klaus Rabe, pulmonary doctor, thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much for having me.
And staying with the experts, he's a biologist, a science journalist, and our resident corona expert, DW's Derek Williams. And he's been answering many of the questions you sent us about the coronavirus pandemic. Here's our latest Q&A segment.
Can someone who has had COVID-19 catch it again?
There were some disquieting reports earlier this week from South Korea's Centers for Disease Control that 91 patients there who had COVID-19 and survived it tested positive again later for the disease. The WHO has also stated that it's unclear whether recovered patients are immune. That's critical because immunity is at the heart of strategies for combating the virus. The problem is that the body reacts to different pathogens in different ways, sometimes with a sustained immune response that lasts a lifetime, sometimes with one that lasts practically no time at all. So the answer to the question of whether or after how long you can be reinfected is we don't know yet. However, a couple of different studies have looked at how long the typical immune response lasts with related coronaviruses, ones that cause colds. And they show immune response there remains fairly robust after a year. And studies of how long SARS and MERS patients continue to produce defensive antibodies against those coronaviruses seem to back that estimate up. So what experts are hoping is that infection should provide some extent of immunity to most people for at least a year, but it'll take time to figure out.
Can you reuse disposable masks if you leave them out for 3 days between wears?
This is a really tough question to answer because there's been so much debate surrounding not only the question of whether masks need to be worn by everyone, but also whether or not they can actually prove dangerous if they're not put on properly or handled correctly. Disposable masks are made to be disposed of after a single use, hence the name. The WHO continues to recommend disposal after a single use, but masks are in short supply during the pandemic, and even medical staff in many places are having to consider questions like whether they can be cleaned or reused. The Centers for Disease Control in the US recommends that when there simply aren't enough masks to go around, health workers only reuse them every 5 days and store the masks after use in breathable paper bags. Of course, that's for trained professionals acting in a crisis, but it's a guideline. Lacking others, it's what I would probably do myself, but it's really a suboptimal solution.
DW Science editor Derek Williams speaking there. And that's it for this edition of COVID-19 Special. For more on the pandemic, do check out our social media channels and our website at dw.com, which has dedicated COVID-19 pages in 30 languages. We'll leave you now with the story of a 12-year-old boy in Mexico doing his part to help bridge supply gaps in face shields for medical staff. Jorge Martinez has been using a 3D printer to create the shields, with each one taking about 45 minutes to make. He's already made some 100 visors to give to medics in his state of Oaxaca. 12-year-old Jorge certainly doing his bit there. I'm Chris Kober in Berlin. Thanks for joining us, and take care.
Now is the time to listen to the experts. Scientists are our best hope to end the coronavirus pandemic. Research labs around the world are racing to create a new vaccine. The idea is to simulate an infection while avoiding the possibly severe symptoms of COVID-19. Once vaccinated, our immune system should destroy the virus if we are exposed to it. According to the WHO, there are currently more than 60 teams of scientists working on a vaccine. Under normal circumstances, it would take more than 10 years. But thanks to previous research efforts, there is a chance this process may be fast-tracked, with human trials already underway in some cases. But scientists agree that it will still take months until a vaccine is approved. This is your COVID-19 special on DW News. I'm Monica Jones in Berlin. Good to have you with us. When will a corona vaccine be ready? A vaccine that enables us to resume our lives without restrictions while protecting us from the disease. I'm afraid we need to be patient and keep our distance for a while longer. And let scientists do their job, like here in Berlin, where a biotech company comes up with promising results.
Berlin is empty. Those who can are staying at home. But these lab technicians can't work from home. For them, there's more work than ever. The chemists at the JPT peptide company are regarded as systemically important, since what they're producing here could speed up the search for a coronavirus vaccine. We're creating peptide-based tools that enable the vaccine developers to monitor the immune systems of patients in treatment and to track them over a certain period of time. Peptides are amino acid chains that make up proteins. This company creates hundreds of thousands of them and assembles them so that they resemble the coronavirus's most important surface proteins. The scientists have been working on this project since January. Their work will contribute to research about the possible effectiveness of a vaccine. In the race for a coronavirus vaccine, some scientists are focusing on the development of vaccines based on messenger RNA, or mRNA. This involves injecting a person with the instructions for part of the virus. This would then spur the body to partially produce the virus. This, in turn, encourages the immune system to develop antibodies. Then, if the real coronavirus strikes, the person would be well equipped and able to defend himself or herself. Whether that will really work is what's being tested with the tools being developed here. JPT's technology has already been used in the fight against the Zika virus and Ebola. The Berlin-based company is indirectly involved in the race for a vaccine, since it belongs to BioNTech, a German company at the forefront of the vaccine race. But for JPT, it's not about competition. I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. At the moment, it's really about getting a vaccine onto the market. It doesn't matter who does this in the end. It's about making a contribution, and maybe being among the first to do so. But right now, it's truly about fulfilling the ethical duty to help. The technicians here seem to feel the same way. Yes, absolutely. You think you can contribute to making people healthy or even healing them. It's very motivating. Yes, sure. But I do have mixed feelings. On the one hand, I'm afraid. On the other, I know I have something important to contribute. It's exciting. It certainly is. A new test could be ready soon, and many are placing their hopes in the effectiveness of an mRNA-based vaccine.
The whole world is waiting for a vaccine. But even though at least 60 teams of researchers around the globe are working to develop one, no one expects a rapid breakthrough, because producing a vaccine goes through several stages, and that takes time. Now, in a first step, the virus and its effects on the human body are analyzed. Now, this is necessary to determine the composition of the vaccine. Potential vaccines are first tested on animals, and later on, This procedure is followed by testing human volunteers. Now, if all those tests are successful, the vaccine has to go through a lengthy approval process, and only after that, mass production can begin. Now, this process usually takes up to 15 years, but thanks to new technologies, development can go a lot faster today. And for more, I'm joined by Klaus Zichotek, president of the Paul-Ehrlich Institute. That's the German Federal Institute of Vaccines and Biomedicines. Good to have you with us. First of all, I mean, should a COVID-19 vaccine be fast-tracked? And if so, what stage would be best to skip?
Definitely, we are fast-tracking the development, and there's nothing to skip, but rather to combine, which means we're given highest priority at the Paul-Ehrlich Institute to the developments and to our regulatory advice. And in terms of let's say, shortening the development time, what we're doing is there are a focused number of animal studies that have to be done. For example, general pharmacology, toxicology, or defining the dose in animals that will be applied of general subjects that will be enrolled in these studies. But we need to be very careful with the assessment and with the development as usual. But of course, we can concentrate, focus, and shorten times.
All right. Well, time, of course, is of the essence of all those studies underway at the moment. Which one is the most promising, you say?
Well, I think we need a variety of COV-2 vaccine developments. What we're prioritizing currently, and also the developers are prioritizing, is RNA, DNA vaccines and also vector vaccines, because they have the advantage that we know exactly which parts of the genetic information and safe genetic information of the pathogen can be included in the vaccine. We know this from preparatory research work also at the Paul-Ehrlich Institute on MERS corona. I think, first of all, those who are at risk should get it first, at risk for severe being infected, maybe at more risk than others. And number two, manufacturing will be no issues.
Time. We have a vaccine. The pandemic will quite probably have peaked. Are we actually working on a vaccine for a future pandemic?
Yes, we are. I think we learned already from the Ebola epidemic that we had in West Africa, and we're taking these kind of learnings to the development here of the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. But we will use the time in any case to develop these platforms so that we are ready and quicker ready than this time to have a vaccine if the next pandemic may arise.
All right, Professor Zichotek there from the German Federal Institute of Vaccines and Biomedicines. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, time to address more of your questions. And please do keep them coming on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, or via email, because our resident corona expert, DW's Derek Williams, stands ready to provide some answers.
The WHO says getting vaccinated against pathogens that cause respiratory ailments like pneumonia is always a good idea, particularly for the elderly. But unfortunately, vaccines against a bacterial infection will not prevent you from getting the COVID-19 pneumonia caused by the coronavirus, because it's a viral pneumonia. So a vaccine against a bacterial pneumonia won't stop it. Many health authorities are currently, however, also recommending getting vaccinated against the flu. That won't prevent you from getting COVID-19 either, but it will hopefully cut down on the number of severe flu cases that end up in the hospital, occupying a bed that might be desperately needed by a COVID-19 patient. One thing that's really crippling us in this pandemic is that we don't know exactly who has had COVID-19. An unknown large number of people have gotten it, but don't know. They were never tested because they had mild symptoms or they had maybe no symptoms at all. That's incredibly important information, though, because it could tell us who is now probably immune. They're part of its immune response, and the antibodies it makes are tailored to that specific bug. Those antibodies remain in your system after you've gotten over the illness, helping to protect you from reinfection. An antibody test is a diagnostic for detecting them. So an antibody test for COVID-19 could tell us if you had it and maybe didn't even notice it. If that's the case, then you would theoretically no longer carry the bug or be able to infect anyone else, and you could get back to work.
Sounds good. That was our COVID-19 special. For more on the pandemic, do check out our social media channels and our website, that's dw.com, which has dedicated COVID-19 pages in 30 languages. I'm Monica Jones in Berlin. Thanks for joining, and stay healthy. The world are under stress. More and more patients are seeking treatment, pushing Italy and Spain, which were burdened with severe austerity measures after the last financial crisis. State-run healthcare systems, on the other hand, are proving to be more robust to deal with the crisis, some experts say. In many countries, this has sparked a discussion about whether healthcare should be a public good run by the state or a business model. This is your COVID-19 special on DW News. I'm Monica Jones in Berlin. Good to have you with us. Now let's agree, money can't buy you everything, but it can give you a better chance of survival. If you can afford a private health insurance, chances are you get to see your doctor sooner than someone on national health. It's not fair, but it is what it is. But how does it work in a crisis like the coronavirus pandemic? In a moment, we'll talk to the CEO of Germany's biggest private hospital operator. But first, this report.
The patients just keep on coming. The coronavirus outbreak is testing the limits of hospitals all over the world. The demand for beds, respiratory equipment, protective gear, and workers continues to surge. Many former medical professionals have been called back on duty, like qualified doctor, the Irish Prime Minister.
As you know, I rejoined the medical register there last month, and I'm setting aside really one session a week, about half a day a week. So far, it's just been a telephone clinic.
The virus, which is for a lifting of the barriers, for example, between public and private hospitals. In Spain, one of the countries worst hit by the crisis, the government has ordered private clinics to share resources with the public system. Australia has pushed through similar measures. In Germany, meanwhile, some
For more, I'm joined now by the CEO of Fresenius, a global healthcare group with more than 290,000 employees in more than 100 countries. And here in Germany, Fresenius is also the largest hospital operator. Welcome, Stefan Sturm. Good to have you with us. Tell me, How are your hospitals holding up in this health crisis?
We've got to differentiate between the situation in Germany and in Spain. We have 86 hospitals in Germany where we're still waiting for a large wave of corona patients to arrive. On the other hand, we have 44 hospitals across Spain, where in particular in the hotspots in Madrid and Barcelona, we have had more than our fair share of patients to deal with.
Right. How big a role, I mean, it feels awful to talk about money in such a situation, but how big a role does money play when it comes to providing good health care?
Well, we have got to see that the fatality rate in Germany is substantially lower than the one that we're seeing elsewhere. But I do believe that first and foremost, that has to do with quite a few issues that happen outside a hospital. So when it comes to the amount of testing that we're doing, the denominator in that fatality ratio, Germany has done substantially more, as far as I can see, than most other countries. But also when we look Germany is a bit better equipped than what we're seeing elsewhere. And as far as our own hospitals are concerned, we have invested quite heavily in the past. And we can now also afford to shift resources within this large network to wherever they are needed.
Right. As you just mentioned about shifting resources, you do run private hospitals, and private hospitals that's in their nature, they need to be profitable. Is that a problem now, given that treating COVID-19 patients is very time and
society? And as it was mentioned a bit earlier on, yes, the Spanish government has drawn on resources to help out, and we haven't seen a large wave of corona patients yet, and therefore in many of our hospitals where we have followed the minister's appeal to delay any elective surgery, yes, we're seeing an underutilization of capacity, but that is obviously absolutely fine. We got to see through this crisis now. And everything else is going to be taken care of afterwards.
That is definitely an almost luxury position to be in, the one that you describe here in German hospitals. And so you mentioned it, that so far Germany's health system managed to keep the number of COVID-19 and have to make hard decisions.
This has been a very, very dynamic development that frankly has beaten also my expectation. So I will be cautious from what worked in other countries. As an aside, we have also had quite a number of volunteers in our German hospital system to go down to Spain and help out our colleagues over there. And those who are returning now have real life experience as to how we can better combat this crisis.
And weeks.
Thank you. Stay healthy.
And now let's get some more answers to your questions. Remember that you can keep them coming in on YouTube, on Facebook.
Throughout this pandemic, the number of fatalities in Germany has remained remarkably lower than that in other countries. Only between 1% and 2% of the people who tested positive for COVID-19 here have so far died from the disease. That's a lower case fatality rate than almost any other country. To answer the question, Germany appears to have been better prepared than many other countries in one key way. The number of acute care beds here is very high. There are more than twice as many of them per capita as there are in European neighbors like France or Italy. I don't think any country was really well prepared for COVID-19, but Germany's reaction to it looks to have made a significant difference in how many people it will probably kill here.
The US and the UK were supposedly well prepared for this kind of emergency, but they're seeing a lot of infections and fatalities. Why?
That's a tough question because so many factors appear to be contributing to how effective That said, one thing in particular has seemed to play a pivotal role in slowing the spread of the disease in some countries, and that's early widespread testing. As we've heard over and over again, you can't fight what you can't see, right? So both the US and UK got off to quite slow starts when it came to testing because healthcare systems there rely on tests from a single government source, and those government sources didn't respond very rapidly. So despite getting top marks for their healthcare systems in reports like the Global Health Security Index, a structural aspect of how the US and UK were set up to deal with a possible pandemic might now be making a big difference in overall numbers.
DW's Derek Williams, and he'll be back, of course, tomorrow to answer more of your questions. For now, that was our COVID-19 special. I'm Monica Jones in Berlin. For more on the pandemic, do check out our social media channel. Virus. They've so far donated more than $3 million to the relief effort. It's a way of showing their gratitude to Italian priests who helped build hospitals in Taiwan after the Second World War. The funds will be used to purchase much-needed medical supplies for COVID-19 stricken areas.
Do you also feel like banging your head into the wall sometimes? Stay in bed forever? Just cry? Or plainly freak out because the bad news about corona seems to have no end? Well, these are tough times. You switch on the news or look at your favorite website and it's not a pretty picture. More dead every day, infections on the rise. Johns Hopkins now counts more than 1 million cases worldwide. Healthcare systems are reaching their limits. Whole countries in lockdown. Friends and families are cutting off contact with each other. And it doesn't end there. Businesses are facing bankruptcy. Workers are losing their jobs. It's all pretty scary stuff. So how can we get through these challenging times without feeling helpless and depressed? Today we'll talk about how to get on top of that situation that feels very much like nothing is in our own hands. This is DW News with our special coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm Gerhard Elfers in Berlin. Welcome. So what coronavirus does is bad news and what it does with our brain. Maren, how does this barrage of bad news that we're seeing right now influence our perception of this pandemic?
Well, first of all, it tilts the perception in a certain direction because, as you already mentioned, most of the news are actually negative. So we get the idea that the world out there is even more negative and even more challenging than it is, really. So what that does to our brain is really create a continuous or chronic stress response. So we're continuously in this situation where we think we either have to fight
the virus is a threat we cannot see or feel. It's similar to radiation. Does that give the fear another dimension?
Yes, certainly, because of course, if we see something like a wave coming towards us, we can run. And what we realized also, especially in many countries where the virus wasn't present in the beginning, people were very relaxed about it because it was far away. And something we know about risk perception in humans is that spoken openly is quite bad. So when we don't see something, we actually can't grasp it because our brains are not optimized for that. So it really needs to be local, it needs to be immediate, and it needs to hurt people for us in order to act. And of course, that creates really a challenging situation because then what also comes into effect is what I mentioned before, that it creates this continuous stress response, which hinders our problem-solving abilities.
It doesn't really help. Old people are not only more at risk, they are also by default more isolated than younger people, and now even family can't visit. What does that do to the elderly, and how can we help keep their spirits up?
Yeah, well, maybe also saying something more hopeful, because I ended on a very negative note in general, is what it can also create, and also especially to the elderly people, is a sense of community. Because once we all understood that this is really a risk situation and this is really a danger that is out there, even though we can't really feel